Good afternoon. I'd like to call our regular business meeting to order. And I'd like to ask the treasurer to call the roll. Present.
Brown. Here. Vice President Cole.
Present.
Ms. Gibbs. Here.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. I'd like to welcome our new board liaison. This is her first meeting, Misty Nichols. Welcome. Thank you. And now let's have the Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like to ask Mr. Playon Patrick. Is he among us? Has he arrived yet?
He may be down in the other room.
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, then I'd like to ask Misty Nichols to go to the podium and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And would everyone please be upstanding for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You have now been duly initiated. Thank you. All right. Now, will someone please advise when Mr. Patrick joins us, as he is not here yet? Let's move on. Item 3, review and adopt the agenda. So I'll briefly read through the business before us. No board recognitions this evening. We do have 2 individuals who have signed up to provide public testimony this evening. So we will hear from them, after which we will hear reports from our 3 direct reports if they have them to offer. We will subsequently take up our consent agenda, after which time we may be prepared to recess the meeting so that we can attend to honors and recognitions, which is happening at the front of the building. You're all welcome to join us there. We will then return here to finalize any business that remains before us, which may include announcements from board members and points of pride. We will then recess into executive session. Any thoughts on that? Any motions for anything to be added or deleted?
Remove the first policy item from the agenda.
Mr. Brown, what's the number?
Specifically, the item pertaining to equity.
8.1. All right, so there is a motion, and is there a second? Moved and seconded by Board Member Reyes. Mr. Treasurer?
Mrs. Dare.
Yes.
President Baker.
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
Discussion. Oh, you forgot discussion.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Is this on removal of this item?
Yes, is this vote to remove the policy, or is this the vote on the agenda?
This is simply to remove item 8.1 from the
Thank you.
agenda.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
You both stand.
Yes.
Mrs. Dare, President Baker. Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Vice President Cole.
Yes.
Mr. Ragland.
Yes.
Ms. Reyes.
Yes.
That motion carried.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Now, anything else? If not, then I will accept a motion to accept the agenda as amended.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Mr. Treasurer?
President Baker.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Vice President Cole.
Yes.
Mr. Ragland.
Yes.
Ms. Reyes.
Yes.
And Ms. Adair.
Yes.
That motion carried.
Thank you very much. Now, we have a special student performance this evening. Mr. Patrick has arrived, and I'll ask that he make his way to the podium. Mr. Patrick is a young man with many talents. Tonight, he will demonstrate his talents as a spoken word artist. The poem he will share tonight won first place at the Opera Columbus Youth Performing Arts Competition. The prize was $500 and a leading role in The Journey, an Opera Columbus civil rights production of Opera Columbus. Mr. Patrick's award-winning poem is entitled War Zone. The theme of War Zone is civil rights and social justice. Mr. Patrick, welcome. Good evening. The floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Plan Patrick, and this is War Zone. 3. Peace is only a part of a system that has always known sacrifice, struggle, strife, violence, surrender. Your country is the border of your world. Hold your flag up, so high that even your grandmother will roll over in her grave to see it. Your patriotism is tattooed on your skin. America, America, America. Foreign America. Where do I begin? In Africa, a motherland that I cannot call home. That mother cries out to me, but this body will never feel safe in her arms. In the ocean, where our kin are still sinking, we sing about wading in the water, yet we don't know what lies in the deep end. I lay on my back just to feel how the water can pull you under, just to feel how some jump off without hesitation, how blood can never be forgotten even when the water is clear. Maybe in the ships that we slept on, make a home out of wood and bone, skin rotting off, the air so thick it moves, the air so thick you can feel the weight of your whole life in one breath, home. Maybe a battle, maybe a fight for centuries, maybe no land was ours to begin with. Maybe we've forgotten how we've darkened our white and lightened our black, so easy to forget. It feels like a story, a myth, a tale, a tragedy to keep us in line, but why? I was told that long ago, they used to cut the hair off of recruits so they can forget about their past lives, become soldiers in an instant. Obedience begins with the removal of our self-worth and importance. I was told that long ago, they used to torture the enslaved, even the women and children, to make them forget about who they used to be, talk about a forgotten history, a family tree ripped up from the roots, thousands of pedigrees buried just below the skin. They made us soldiers, an army of broken men and women. Our lives became nothing more than open caskets. Our bodies became test dummies, set fire to the skin placed on this mannequin from the dust. I was created into the dust. I will return, but right now, my skin expendable cannon fodder. My skin the first to be sent out. My skin the draft paper we were forced to sign. My skin out on the front lines fighting your battles. 2. Peace is only a part of a system that has always known war, whitewash, whipping, weeping, weapons made out of black bodies, my body a war zone. So easy to forget who you're fighting or what you're fighting for when you can't remember your past, the bodies, the sea, the ships, the chains, the twang of master falling off your lips or commander. The cotton field picture perfect plantation. I've seen plantation turn golf course, turn wedding venue, turn our history into nothing, bulldoze over our wounds, tell us that we don't deserve to linger on past battle scars, little black soldier. They say that you are so different. I say you know nothing about me because I know nothing about myself. How can a black boy change the fate of an entire nation while he hides the pressure of walking in the daylight under his spine? I didn't know bullets could penetrate so fast. I didn't know bombshells still hurt after the explosions, the craters that are left afterwards, the holes that are never filled, the home that we can never go back to, the history that has slowly been erased. My body is a lifetime of oppression at only 17. My body, never mind for the owning. A soldier lives inside of me. Peace is the only lie I've ever chosen to believe. My body is the war zone. Let the blood spill into the water. That way we can always go back to where history began to sink one. I never leave home without preparing for the sound of the explosion. Boom.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrick, for presenting your poem. Do you have anyone with you here this evening, family or anyone from your school that we can recognize for helping you to be successful? Thank you very much for being here. Any questions or comments on Mr. Patrick's performance?
Outstanding, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us this evening. We do appreciate it. Let's move right into public comment. 2 individuals have signed up to address the board this evening. Each of you will have 4 minutes to provide your testimony to the board. I'll call your name, state your topic, board action requested, and when you approach the podium, you should see a 4-minute timer up on the screen behind me. First speaker, Felix Quachi Jr. Topic, curriculum, board action requested. Seriously consider making revisions to the curriculum in a manner that reflects our country's diversity. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. President Baker, Vice President Cole, Treasurer Bahoric, Internal Auditor Smith, members of the board, and Superintendent Dr. Talissa Dixon. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board today. My name is Felix Quachi. Both my children attend Columbus City Schools, and I believe in a strong city school system. I must, however, put to the board that the current curriculum as it addresses issues of diversity, inclusion, and race are sorely lacking. As teachers and parents, we partner in the work of educating our children. The word educate comes from 2 Latin root words, educare and educere. Educare means to mold or train. Educere means to lead out. The abiding effects of racism will continue to fester in our nation until we begin to mold and lead tomorrow's citizens out of repeating the mistakes of our nation's past. I have long held that much of our nation's greatness is lost to racism and its iterations over time. And as educators, we must make an intentional effort to produce a citizenry who truly understand their history, or they are destined to repeat the same mistakes as those before them. I encourage the board to tackle this much needed change with the same intentionality with which the forced removal of Native Americans in the 1830s and Jim Crow laws between roughly 1876 through 1968 were implemented. I challenge the board to update the current social studies and history curriculums and reading lists with a more in-depth and unvarnished look at all facets of American history and social life. These courses must not be electives and must be experiential in orientation. Simply papering over the cracks that plague us only once a year is not the solution. I grew up in Ghana, located in West Africa, a nation made up of 5 major tribal groups where over 110 dialects are spoken. When independence was attained from British colonial rule in 1957, Ghana fashioned, with intentionality, an educational system and curriculum without barriers, based on merit, where Ghanaian children from any tribe can attend a school of their choosing anywhere in the country if they make the grade. Ghana's history is taught frankly in classrooms across the nation, and children get to know and grow up with children from other tribes. My personal theory as to why Ghana has been fortunate, never to experience civil war, is because our educational system erodes our tribal differences, and for the most part, Ghanaians think of themselves as Ghanaians first, before which tribe they come from. We continue to live in a society with entrenched systemic challenges that simply passing laws cannot resolve. Vanguard is defined in the Merriam-Webster Dictionary as the group of people who are leaders of an action or movement in society. I put to the board today that the work of molding the best version of the society we aspire to be begins in classrooms throughout our nation, and I challenge this board to be the vanguard. Thank you.
Mr. Quachi, are there any clarifying questions for Mr. Quachi? Mr. Brown?
Excuse me. Mr. Quanchi, just want to thank you. Both you and Mr. Patrick a moment ago have helped me focus and provide some greater clarity in this work that we do. I'm not going to suggest for a moment that I understand where you're coming from, but I do agree and respect it. Coming from white privilege, I recognize and need to be reminded because I'm not always consciously aware of it. One of the luxuries of white privilege is that. But you and Mr. Patrick both have helped to remind me of the important work that should be done.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I remember you were a student of history yourself, right? And I must point out that most great civilizations have several factors that lead to their rise, decline, and fall, right? In modern history, America is one of those great civilizations, and unfortunately, we get complacent in what makes our union, as it were, work, okay? Ancient Rome, nobody thought would fall, but they got complacent. America's abiding feature, so to speak, is the fact that it seems like at our downmost points in our history, somebody comes along that galvanizes us, reminds us what the true American spirit is, and we're able to move forward from there. That will not sustain our union. If we don't wake up and smell the roses and change the way we think, from the classrooms, from the children, all the way up, our hearts and minds will continue to fester in stereotypes and all kinds of bigotry that is taught at home. If that model isn't challenged anywhere else, when does it turn around? So that's your job. I will hold you to account, so I will be checking in from time to time to see where this is all going. So thank you so much for your time.
Any other clarifying questions for Mr. Quachi? If not, Mr. Quachi, are you able to provide your testimony to the board liaison in a written form?
Yeah, I have it right here.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to come down this evening. Our second and final speaker this evening, Kevin Persinger, topic transportation problems, board action requested. Explain why the buses are continually late to pick the children up from school. Mr. Persinger, good evening.
Good evening, President Baker, Vice President Cole, Treasurer Broerk, Internal Auditor Smith, members of the board, and Superintendent Dr. Dixon. I, for the last several months, as a parent of a Columbus student, have had the nightmare of wondering when my student is going to be home. This year, he was fortunate enough to transfer into your gifted student program, which I was very proud for him to be able to do. But along with that also came the issue of him having to ride the school bus for the very first time. The first couple weeks of school, I had a lot of understanding on the issue. It was a complicated time for all the drivers to get all their routes down. As time has gone on, things did not necessarily get better. I've given up on the bus taking my son to school in the morning because it was unreliable on getting there. Now, the point I've come to is that after school, the bus is so erratic in the time at which it decides to pick the students up from school. I'm concerned because, from my understanding, there are supposed to be systems in place that are supposed to inform us parents when these issues are arising. I feel like they are not being used. When I tried to address the transportation department with this issue, I didn't really seem like I was getting anywhere. The people who I had spoken to didn't. One of them honestly told me that they really weren't surprised they were having those kinds of problems, which I thought was a little bit of a shock. I'm trying to understand why these problems are persistent, and also from my understanding, it's not a confined issue to my son's school. I've talked to other parents across the city who have also complained about this issue, and I'm just trying to understand why this issue is going on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Persinger. Are there any clarifying questions, colleagues? All right. Board Member Gibbs. Welcome.
Thank you for coming to speak to us. When you talk about having worked with the district, have you spoke with someone at transportation and you feel like you haven't gotten it resolved?
Yes, I've filed a few complaints about it with the transportation department. Every time I'm asked to leave a phone number, I have yet to get a call back from anybody there. Part of the problem that I'm having is that when the bus is running late and I am unable to get a hold of my son on his cell phone, if I call the transportation department, I'm not able to find out where that bus is. They have no idea why the bus is running late or that the bus was even running late. I find that concerning for my child's safety, and I just don't understand why something like that would be continued to go on when I know the staff at the school are well aware of it, and they've told me that they've tried to contact transportation about it. I'm just trying to understand why it's continuing to happen.
Thank you so much. So the resolution you're seeking is someone to get back to you and work with you on the resolution?
Yeah, I just want to see some kind of change done to see that this is taken as important as everything says that it is. I mean, it's one of the statements that's listed on the transportation websites, on their website, that safety is their number one concern, and I agree that it should be. But if I'm not being told where my child is and when, that is very concerning, and I question that safety.
Thank you so much. President Baker, someone will, I'm just asking.
Yes, ma'am.
The whole team is nodding, so I know they're all about to follow up with you right now. I'm sure they're going to connect with you too.
Madam Superintendent, can you just make sure that somebody, whoever the appropriate person is, speaks with this parent? Any other clarifying questions? Excuse me, Mr. Vice President?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just very quickly as well. Thank you so much for coming here this evening. Many of us, even at this table, have had some of those experiences from time to time. Madam Superintendent, is there opportunity for us to get an idea of what the follow-up process actually is for folks who call in? What are our protocols? What's set in place for us to make sure that we've heard the voices of concerned parents or others, guardians? What is our follow-up process to ensure remediation? What is the lead up to these types of challenges? I'd like to know myself and have some deeper insight brought forth to the board on that, please.
Board Member Adair?
Along that same vein, customer service is one of our major focuses, and I'm not sure if we have data analytics, I'm sure we do, around the number of calls come in and resolution, but for a strategic level, and especially as we move into our next planning cycle, I would really like to have a better grasp of that. Unfortunately, this is not the first time I've heard this either, and as a parent, my child doesn't take the bus either. I take her to school. So I hear you and I feel you, and this is not okay. And so I just want to move us back up to a higher level though, and think strategically about the data behind it and ways to address it, as Board Member Cole said.
Any other clarifying questions for the speaker? Thank you very much for taking the time to be here.
Thank you very much for your time.
Yes, sir. All right, let's move on then to hear from our direct reports. Madam Superintendent, have you a report for us this evening? Thank you. Mr. O'Connor, you are sitting in for the Internal Auditor. Have you a report from the Office of Internal Audit?
President Baker, there's no report from internal audit this evening.
All right, thank you for being here.
Sir?
Mr. Treasurer, have you a report for us this evening?
Well, you're 2 for 3, I guess, because I do have a report for you.
Very well then.
And at everyone's request, I will certainly be brief. This is the monthly financial report for October. It was presented to and reviewed by the Finance and Appropriations Committee last week on Wednesday afternoon. Through October, year-to-date revenues are up approximately $7 million or 2%, and expenditures are running under plan by about $18 million. That end result is an increase in the actual cash balance over plan. There we go. An actual increase of cash balance over plan of about $25 million. The highlights on the revenue side, There we go. We seem to be focusing on state aid, obviously, because of still getting a feel for the funding this year. It is still on target to come in at FY19 levels. In your management discussion and analysis of the company's financial reports, you'll see a rather detailed comparison of the former SF with the School Foundation Payment Report and the current one, so you can look at that, but we are at target to continue to come in at the FY19 levels. We were under plan this month by $3.9 million as expected because the plan had included an increase in state funding, which, as I said, did not come to fruition. Those dollars that we get additionally from the state are going into the Student Wellness and Success Fund, and that's fund number 467. In October, we received half of our annual allotment. We received $5.9 million of the 11.8 that we will get later this fiscal year. The only other revenue item of note is that other revenues are continuing to run over plan. They were $0.6 million or 600,000 over plan this month, mainly in the area of tuition and investment income, and they're running $2.8 million ahead year to date. On the expenditure side, the highlights are personnel over plan this month for the first time this year, and as I had said to the committee and reported to this board before, that some of the new FTEs are online. Some of the increases we've granted are online. So we will anticipate that we should continue to reduce that year-to-date variance in the coming months. Currently, we stand at about $10.5 million under plan. That's down from $11.8 million last month. Purchase services is our perennial line item that runs under plan, about $6.6 million under for the month and $4.8 million year-to-date. Again, primarily in the areas of tuition and professional and technical services. Community schools, probably our second largest item after personnel, running about $1.2 million under plan. That's subject to change as student enrollment continues to be reported, from the beginning of the year. And so, again, $1.2 million under plan so far. Advances out, really just a cash flow item based upon cash needs of other funds. $1.1 million under plan for the month and down about $1.8 million. We'll see more advance activity, smaller activity throughout the year, but near the end of the year as cash flow needs come to fruition near the end of the fiscal year, we'll see that pan out a little bit more. On the variance side, again, you'll see that all the dollar amount variances are low, and that only on some of the smaller, or at least in percent-wise, the lesser percent items in our overall budget, those variances are above 5%. But again, they represent a much smaller amount of our overall budget. So very much on target, in my opinion. On the expenditure side, again, all variances except for personnel are low. That is, they're below $5 million. And with the variances on a percentage basis, though, in many of the cases are high. But again, as you can see, in the larger categories, it's only personnel that kind of stands out. And we do watch that every month. So all in all, we're on target. Revenues are above plan, expenditures running under plan, and we'll see how that bears itself out. I do believe some of these variances will begin to erode, especially in the area of personnel in the coming months. So I didn't time that, but that concludes my report. I hope I was brief but inclusive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Are there any questions for the Treasurer? I believe that may be one for the record books. Thank you very much. I know a number of us saw this at the Finance and Appropriations Committee meeting. Thank you. All right, let's then move into board matters, item number 8. So we'll skip right to the first item that remains on the agenda, the second reading of amendments to bylaw 0147. Is there a motion that we adopt item 8.2?
I will move that we adopt policy 0147 as recommended by the Policy Review Committee and as presented last meeting by Subcommittee Chair Jennifer Adair, and I couldn't attend, but I hear that she did a great job.
She did, and I'll ask her to second that.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all right. So this is a bylaw amendment, not a policy amendment. And I'll just say, because it is a bylaw amendment, we require a 4/5 majority on the vote. So we have a motion and a second. I don't see any discussion. Mr. Treasurer?
No question.
Board Member Gibbs?
Just on the, on this policy, can you once again talk about the number? How did you come up with the number in the number of people to attend conferences? And I think it's in B.
Board Member
I
Adair?
would like to speak to provision B in terms of the number.
So Ms. Gibbs' question relates to B, which indicates that generally speaking, no more than 3 members would typically attend any particular conference. Board Member Adair?
So actually, the subcommittee talked about that quite a bit, and it states right now no more than 3. It's our understanding that typically, in general, when the budget's done, 3 is the number that's used in looking at the expenses, and so that is what we went with. But there was a lot of discussion about whether that should be 2, and in the end, the subcommittee is going to go ahead and recommend the 3. So again, 3 was just kind of more based on what we currently do in the budget process to assign allocation to certain trips.
If I could add briefly, the committee itself had a similar discussion with some folks favoring 2, some folks favoring 3, but ended up, let's get this done and we'll work with 3.
Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, I just have a
Yes.
question. In terms of the budget, that is not a protocol or a procedure that the number is 3. I'm just trying to understand, why is 3 the magic number, especially if you have a new board with maybe 4 new members? Just wondering, because there's never been a designation of 3. So I'm just wondering if the board is going to take advantage, why is it 3 as opposed to another?
Well, and I might add, item B does say, in general, the expectation is that no more than 3 members will attend.
And it also says unless otherwise approved, and then there's another subsection in here that encourages education of new board members. So in reality, we aren't stripping our discretion, we're just providing a little bit more guidelines around the choices. And so if there is a conference, especially one that we believe new board members should go to, we could send 4, 5, we could send the whole board if we feel like that is strategically aligned to what we need to accomplish. And this still gives us that flexibility.
Other questions, colleagues?
So
Ms. Gibbs?
just one more question. And so is the intent, and I understand all of the conversation around the policy and understanding, I'm in agreement with the provision, if you're in your last 6 months, I'm okay with that. Other than that, what do you say the spirit of it is about the policy? Is the spirit to put a parameter on the professional development, or is it to, I don't know, can you just recapture that for me?
Board Member Adair?
Yes, so I brought this forward as, to ensure that we are providing clarity and transparency around this process, and to make sure that we are showing that we are fiscally responsible. You all have heard me say, and I've said it publicly, I believe in professional development, and I believe we need it. But we also need to do it in the most transparent way to ensure that we are using taxpayer dollars appropriately and ensuring that we can prove a return on our investment. And so this just puts more parameters, more guidance around that, still giving us the flexibility to do what we need to do strategically for this district. And so that's the spirit in which I brought forward this policy for review.
Thank you. Are there other questions on the motion before us? Item 8.2, Mr. Vice President?
Thank you. Can you explain section F, cancel regular or duty calls, special or emergency meetings, or meeting for which a quorum is not established shall not be deemed a meeting for compensation
offer credit to each member's bank. Can you
Can
describe
y'all
what
please speak, can y'all please speak directly into the microphones? It seems like others.
Yes.
And what are you referring to?
Yeah.
If I might,
We just
Am I
couldn't hear.
looking at the
Can you
correct
repeat
one?
that?
Mr. Vice President, you are asking about item F on the first page of 0147. That is
Correct.
actually, that's the current policy. That is not a
Okay,
change.
thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other questions related to the motion before us? Ms. Gibbs?
Well, thank you, and I want to thank you for bringing the policy, and I want to thank you for the work of the PRC. I will want to be on record on how disappointed about it being politicized. I think it's a very great work. I think what we've done in it, if you wanted more clarity for a board, has gone forth, and I think that is really good. I hope this board continues to embrace learning about our children, for our children, and the things that we know that they're doing nationally in terms of best practices and the work that not only we get, but the Columbus City District and our staff and our board members give when we present at our conferences. I read this policy and I think it's very good. I hope it's about professional development and not control, and that it's not used to control who gets to go learn or who gets to be a part of this national learning environment, but that it is to provide that clarity and that transparency, which has always been there. But if the policy does it, I think that is great. I also hope with all of the work that's been done on this policy that the full board then takes advantage of professional development, leverage our partnership and our membership in amazing organizations like the Council of Great City Schools and the Ohio School Board Association, and that we take advantage of those programs and what we learn from them. I wish it would have came from that kind of beginning in terms of making sure we are moving forward, but for the record, we did not spend $20,000 on anything, ever, in terms of a conference. And I'm very disappointed that that narrative went forward around the good work that we do and around the great work that is presented in the organizations. And if it's about professional development, we do take advantage of the local PD that's offered. We just had the Ohio School Board Association conference that was right downtown, and we could have had 100% participation. So I hope we continue to do that. And I hope that you and the board, all of our colleagues that are coming on when we are gone, will use this not just as a tool to say one person won over the other, but that the work we've done is going to enable more colleagues, more board members, more staff, more people to learn together. There are tons of sessions, and you need tons of voices to bring those back and to bring diverse opinions about. We can sit in one presentation, and you can hear something totally different than what you heard in that presentation. But that work comes back to be implemented to move our district forward. And so I want to make sure that is said, and again, to thank the committee for its work and to thank you for your due diligence on this policy.
Thank you, Board Member Gibbs. Any other questions on this motion? Mr. Ragland.
Yes, thank you, President Baker, and thank you, Ms. Gibbs and Mr. Dare, especially for your work on the policy. For my part, and we've had this discussion in the Policy Review Committee meeting itself, I am against policy for the sake of personality. I believe that the goals that this policy seeks to accomplish in being rewritten exist within the parameters that we already do have in place. And I want to be very clear that each individual professional development opportunity that exists before the board comes before this board for a vote already. And what is required in those incidences where professional development trips are set to be approved, if you don't like it, vote no. And I don't think that setting these types of guidelines, because what it may end up doing is, you know, we may in the future have opportunities where we want to do other things, and then we have to go and, you know, circumvent this policy that's already in place. I know that the committee sought my input at the policy review committee level, and I gave that to them. I just believe that we're always going to have different personalities that occupy these 7 seats around this table. What is required one year may not be required the next year, and so forth. And so anytime that there is a disagreement with who may be going or how many may be going, we reserve the right to vote no on the trip. And I don't want to let that go. I know that it has been highly politicized. It has been. And I understand that everyone has an opinion on this, and the public has an opinion on this. If you don't like it, don't approve it. And that's not just with this particular policy or with this particular issue. That is with any issue. And I just want to make sure that we understand that we reserve the right to express our disapproval with any policy through a no vote, as it is called by the treasurer. And that is something that I think we need to do a lot more of. A lot of this, and you talked about the spirit of the policy, Board Member Gibbs. A lot of it was around transparency and making sure that everything was out on the table. Another tool that we have at our disposal, pull it off of the consent agenda and discuss it. Discuss it openly. Discuss the reasons why we agree or disagree with the number of people going, the particular professional development opportunity itself. There are all types of things that we can do within the confines of the rules that are on the table right now, that will lend itself to the transparency that we're seeking with this policy. And I wanted to make sure that I went on the record and said that not everything requires wholesale uplift of policies or changes of policies. And you could just very simply say, no, I don't approve, and let the chips fall where they may. And I think that is something that we need to be cognizant of, not just with this policy, but with other policies moving forward. Thank you, President Baker.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for your comments. I do believe that it's time to call the roll. Mr. Treasurer?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs?
Yes.
Mr. Ragland?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
Ms. Adair?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Colleagues, as I have 10 till 6, or very nearly, perhaps we should prepare to recess so that we can transition into the other venue so that those who are here for honors and recognitions don't have to wait. So if there's no objection, I would like to, if there's no objection,
Can we finish our business, Mr. President? Can we finish our business? Right.
all right. Well, let's carry on then. Item 8.3 is a second reading of policy updates. This is an omnibus group of updates. And is there a motion?
There is a motion
Mr.
to
Brown?
approve. Jennifer presented them at the last meeting. I understand that there's been no questions or discussion, and believe we should proceed.
A second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on item 8.3. Mr. Treasurer?
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs?
Yes.
Mr. Ragland?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
Ms. Adair?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
And Mr. Brown?
Yes.
That motion carried.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. I'd like to thank the Policy Review Committee and its members for making sure that we stay current. That was one of the reasons why I created the Policy Review Committee to begin with. Mr. Chairman, Chairman Brown, I want to thank you for your ongoing efforts to make sure that we do remain current. Let's move on to item 8.4, which is a resolution to encourage and take action for an accurate count during the 2020 United States Census. And I do believe that we have a member of staff who is prepared to discuss this with us. Is that correct, Madam Superintendent?
You have to update us.
Okay. Would you like to ask that person to come to the podium? Or is that person you?
Alicia.
Ms. Gillison, would you mind joining us at the podium to talk about the Census 2020 and the importance of everyone participating?
Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity.
Good evening.
The Communication Department and our Department of Engagement, we are working with the city and the county on a Census 2020 campaign because, as you know, every person counts. And when we look back at the data and we look at past census data, we notice that a lot of time our ELL communities are economically disadvantaged communities, and our children are not counted. And we're going forward, we have lessons that will, in every classroom starting in December, through the curriculum department, they will be working with the teachers, there will be lessons. So our plan is to start from the grassroots and start with teaching our young people how important it is to be counted so that when they go home, they can say, hey mom, hey dad, I want to be counted. And that there is a certain energy that is surrounding the Census 2020. We also will have campaigns on social media, and we'll have campaigns working with our communication department of some of our own students saying, I want to be counted, count me in. So those are just a couple of the activities that we're doing as we work on the Census 2020 with the city.
Ms. Gillison, can you talk a little bit about some of the dangers of undercount and how it could disproportionately impact students and their families in Columbus City schools?
Thank you for that question, President Baker. The dangers of undercounting our students comes down to funding for our students. And if we already look at the disproportionate number, that dollar amount that we get from the state and the federal government based on the number of students we have, if you just take for a moment and think that maybe 20% or 30% of our students aren't being counted, then that is less funding going into our education system for our young people.
Absolutely, and there's also representation at local, state, federal levels is also based in part on the descendant
Absolutely.
census. Yeah, and so it has been typical that students and families in cities like ours have been undercounted, and so that has had a negative impact on our funding, on our representation. And so I know that the superintendent has been participating in a city-county committee that has been focused on making certain that as many people as possible do participate in the census, because it's not just filling out a form or going online and being counted, but it's making certain that everybody who should be counted is counted, because it has a major impact, even beyond what most people understand. So, Ms. Gillison, thank you for your leadership. Anything else you want to talk to us about on this topic?
We are excited to embark on this topic, and our superintendent, Dr. Talisa Dixon, is the chair for the pre-K through 12 Education Committee for Census 2020.
Thank you, Ms. Gillison.
Thank you.
Colleagues, questions before I offer the resolution? Mr. Ragland?
Thank you, President Baker. I participated in the census from a job perspective in the year 2000. And it's at this point that I want to encourage, especially our parents and those within the community, to go after the jobs that are available for the census. You can go to 2020census.gov and seek out opportunities for jobs. A part of what they are talking about with the undercount stems from some cultural issues. Sometimes we don't want to come to the door when there are people who don't look like us standing in front of it ringing a bell looking official. And oftentimes it works a lot better when you have someone that you know, maybe from your neighborhood, that is working on the census that comes to the door that you already know or that you recognize culturally, who can help us get a more accurate count. And so I would encourage those of our parents who are looking for quality jobs that allow you some flexibility, especially during the daylight hours, to go to 2020census.gov and seek out opportunities for jobs. We need to literally be focused on making sure that we have culturally competent folks who are going into the homes of our residents, making certain that we get an accurate count. It's not just an accurate count for the sake of an accurate count. It's how do we get there? And so making sure that we have those jobs and we go into our communities to count our own folks is very, very important, and it's imperative to the success of our community. So 2020census.gov. Thank you, President Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Ragland. That's a very good point. Thank you for raising that. Board Member Gibbs.
Yes. Thank you very much. I just want to underscore what Board Member Ragland said. We really need everyone to get engaged. It is very difficult to penetrate some of our communities of color. We have not, as a country, done a great job of making everyone feel welcome in the last 2 years and making everyone feel as if though they're not going to be threatened with all matters of deportation and other threatening events. So it's going to be very important that we all really get behind the census and especially the school. We are a trusted entity in most parts, and people will listen to us. So if you are bilingual, if you are connected in other communities, other than the majority community, please get involved, whether you are going to volunteer or you'll host programs at your churches or your organizations. I know you'll hear it 1,000 times, but we will leave millions of dollars, almost billions of dollars on the table, and that is money that could be used for our community as a whole, and especially African American, Latino, and other communities of color, and they will need that, and they are traditionally left out. So I just want to underscore everyone's initiative, be excited, get involved, but there is billions that we will lose, especially as schools and as we count populations, how many congressional seats we get, how the lines are, a lot comes from this. And so I'm excited. We heard an amazing presentation in Louisville at the Council of Great City Schools of all the work they're doing to pull this together. But right here in Columbus, we have a lot of people working on it. So get a job or get involved.
Thank you, Ms. Gibbs. Any other comments before I offer the resolution, colleagues? All right, here is the resolution that I'll ask you to contemplate. This is a motion to encourage and take action for an accurate count during the 2020 U.S. Census. Whereas the decennial census occurs every 10 years to enumerate every person residing in the United States and is fundamental to ensuring that all residents of our great city have access to fair representation, essential services, and economic development. And whereas an accurate count of persons living in Columbus and Franklin County in the 2020 census is vital to determine the representation of individuals, families, and communities in our local, state, and federal governments. And whereas the 2020 census count of children living in Columbus City schools will be the basis of federal education funding allocated to our schools over the next 10 years, specifically the federal programs serving our students living in poverty and students with disabilities. And whereas population data derived in the 2020 census will be used by both government and businesses to determine which neighborhoods and communities in Columbus and Franklin County should receive services and investments like libraries, health centers, and grocery and retail stores. And whereas the decennial census has historically undercounted populations in large urban areas such as ours, and whereas the populations that are prevalent in urban areas like Columbus and Franklin County are at high risk of being undercounted, including young children, people of color, low-income households, language minority families, foreign-born residents, and households with limited internet access, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. And whereas children are more likely to be missed in the census count if they reside in the complex households that are also common in urban areas, such as multi-generation households, extended families, and multifamily households. And whereas the 2020 census, there's a heightened risk of an undercount due to the digital divide, language access issues, and local community mistrust in the federal government. And whereas local and state governments, as well as community-based organizations, can play a critical role in counteracting the undercount risks, reaching hard-to-count populations, and ensuring their communities are counted in 2020. And whereas it is paramount for the school board, superintendent, principals, teachers, parent organizations, and all leaders in Columbus City Schools to communicate the importance of Census 2020 to families and community members to ensure everyone is counted, now therefore be it resolved that Columbus City Schools will develop and adopt a plan of action around ensuring a complete count of all students and their families residing within the school district on the 2020 census, and be it further resolved that Columbus City Schools is committed to working in partnership with other local, civic, business, and community leaders, the state of Ohio, and others to engage, educate, and count every resident in Columbus and Franklin County in the 2020 census. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further conversation, discussion, colleagues? Anything else you want to add, Madam Superintendent? Okay. Mr. Treasurer, would you call the roll?
Ms. Gibbs?
Yes.
Mr. Ragland?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
Ms. Adair?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you very much, Mr. Treasurer. Thank you, colleagues. Now that it is 6 o'clock, is there any objection to a recess? We are in recess. Please move to, too late, Mr. Brown. Let's all please move to the front of the building. All right.
You gotta gavel this back in.
Right. So,
You didn't get a vote.
It was a mistake, the earlier.
Mr. Treasurer?
You recessed kind of at your discretion, so you can kind of undo that if you'd like, as far as I'm concerned. There was not a formal motion for that.
Let's pretend
And
there was
Mr.
no
Brown,
motion.
I believe, made a motion, but I did not hear a second.
Second over here
Thank you.
for consent agenda.
That's
Oh.
where I am.
Okay, very good. So we'll pretend. All right.
Sorry, President, can you restate the motion that's on the floor?
I believe Mr. Brown.
This
moved
is a motion to approve the consent agenda as set forth in the agenda.
Yeah, Mr. Brown just simply moved the consent agenda. All right. Colleagues, questions, comments? Any piece of legislation contained within our consent agenda this evening?
President Baker, I'd like to thank everyone who gave
Ms.
us the
Gibbs.
donations.
Thank you for calling that out.
Air Force One.
Any other comments, questions? All right, hearing, seeing none. Mr. Treasurer?
Thank you. Mr. Ragland.
Yes.
Ms. Reyes.
Yes.
Ms. Adair.
Yes, with the exception of 16.3, on which I need to abstain.
President Baker.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Vice President Cole.
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs. That motion carries.
Colleagues, now would you entertain a recess?
Yes.
Yes.
I see no objection. Last call.
Nope.
We're recessed. All right, let's all move to the front of the building for our honors and recognition ceremony. Announcements. Colleagues? Mr. Ragland.
Yes, thank you, President Baker. I'd like to announce the December 4th Engage to Empower Literacy Night at the Oakley Full Gospel Baptist Church. We'll begin at 6 p.m. and go until 8 p.m. We are calling all ministers of faith, Sunday school departments, education departments within every mosque, synagogue, church, cathedral on the west side to meet us at 3415 El Paso Drive at 6 p.m. Thank you very much to Mrs. Gillison and her team for getting this all set up at 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. on December 4th. That is a Wednesday. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Ragland. Who would like to go next? Vice President Cole?
Thank you, Mr. President. Very quickly, I want to make sure that all of our colleagues and those listening are aware of this coming November 21st at West High School between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. We are partnering with Impact Community Action to ensure that families have access to home energy assistance program with a heat registration. So we want to make sure that families in the community that need this support are well aware of it. Again, that we're hosting this event Thursday, November 21st, 2019 at West High School located at 179 South Powell Avenue between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. November 21st.
Thank you, Vice President Cole. Board Member Reyes?
Thank you, President Baker. I just want to do a call out, and I don't know if Ms. Gibbs will be also talking about this, but some of us had the opportunity to attend the Ignite conference, So we had an opportunity to be with New American young ladies from high school to whatever age to talk about the importance of running for office, supporting those who run for office, being really engaged in the political arena. So we want to thank the organization Ignite for inviting us and giving us the opportunity. We were with over 60 women from all walks of life to just celebrate and acknowledge the importance of voting, about being engaged. I think there was a lot of hashtags and a lot of billboards. One of them said if every woman voted, then we would basically rule the world. So I just wanted to put that in there. I also wanted to make an announcement at the Our Lady of Guadalupe Center. We are asking anyone who is interested in possibly having a pro bono lawyer look at their DACA or naturalization applications. As some people know, the applications for citizenship, naturalization, DACA, the fees are actually almost doubling or tripling in some cases. So there are organizations like the Our Lady of Guadalupe Center that are providing legal assistance for those who have questions and may need a little bit of help in completing their application process and maybe giving them opportunity to get some fee waivers. They can call 614-340-7961 or they can email olgc@colscss.org if they're interested and need some help in that arena. Just an announcement from my public engagement committee that we are talking about resurrecting the Hall of Fame award that is given to members that have attended Columbus City Schools and graduated or have attended at least a minimum of 2 years and have contributed to the Columbus community and or to our children. More to come on that information. So we will be sending out information on how the process will go, how you nominate somebody, and talking about deadlines and so forth. So just coming down the pike.
Very good. And it looks like W. Shauna Gibbs may be up next. Ms. Gibbs?
Thank you, President Baker. Not sure if you can see this, but it was easier for me to add my points of pride to a slide. I don't know if you can hear me, but there's been some incredible things going on in the district, and I didn't want to miss it. First of all, we had an incredible visit to Sherwood Middle School, and we were joined by the members of the Walnut Ridge football team. So Walnut Ridge was there, Board Member Ragland, and they helped do tours. We were there passing out the reflectors, but we also had high school students there to encourage the middle school students. And this was right before their game, and so they were some amazing tour guides. And they really did inspire the middle school students to start thinking about high school. But while we were also there, they were preparing for a big musical and a play that they had the next day. And so they had dancers and mimes and New York hats. They were really incredible. So their honor for Sherwood, well deserved. They had an amazing team. At the Council of Great City Schools, we were able to have an incredible amount of presentations, and I know we're doing a full conference debrief afterwards, but there were some incredible ones. Most importantly, and I want to leave this with this board, the Atlanta School Board developed a protocol and a board policy around human trafficking and domestic, preventing the domestic minor sex trafficking protocol. And that session walked us through how they developed the policy, but got the entire city, including announcements in the airport, right? And we have major events, and we know that some big events, not because of their own fault, really attracts this. And so they did a great job. So I hope you would look at some of the work they did. Also, Jefferson County, which is Louisville, they created an equity policy. And that presentation from the brother in Jefferson County was amazing. And what he simply says, he talks about why equity policies fail and the things you should do to bring them together. And what he says is you can't tie your tie out of this. We can't mentor our way out of this. We have to work and put in systems that are really going to help us overcome that achievement. And they had their first ever task force on Black and Latina girls. And me and Board Member Reyes was just overwhelmed. The room was packed. And, you know, our whole team was there. We just overwhelmed that they are now diving into this work on girls. There's so much work on Black males and Latino males, but we really have to keep up to make sure our girls don't fall behind. We had a very good time. They had their version of student ambassadors greet us. That was our early breakfast with the superintendent. The top left is Dr. Kim and the Harvard University team that we had a chance to meet with. And when I don't want to take much from our colleagues, but it was a good time. So when you hear them present, you'll hear about that. And that was one of our bands from their district that opened up their conference. The Columbus City School Special Olympic basketball team, Northland versus Beechcroft, is amazing. And the cutie pie down there on the corner is my nephew. And he's played every year. And it was the media team did a great job of putting this on Facebook and doing a video. But I want to shout out our Special Olympics team, the in-school and the after-school program that allows our students to participate and fully be included. They are amazing. And the game is lit. They raised $700, like over $700 for the program. The Color of Science with COSI. Dr. Bertley, he is amazing. He is, this is the second year for their program, and they bring together scientists of color, and they all get, what is it? They get like 7 slides in 10 minutes. Like you only get 7 slides. And they tell their story of how they became interested in science and to achieve where they are. And on the left is Kennedy Watson. Her brother is Telerio Watson. Y'all, I think you've seen him. He Tiger Mushroom Farm family. And she is actually the March of Dimes spokesfamily of the year. So she really enjoys science. She wanted to be a doctor to talk about the science of preemies. In November is National Premature Birth Month, and so it was just amazing. OSBA Capital Conference, we just had it. It was my last conference, so I look forward to whoever's going to take that board seat. It's been about 5 years of working. Of course, we were talking about student achievement and all of the work we do with OSBA. There are 6 seats set aside for large districts. Columbus City has one, and I hope you look forward to doing that. We had incredible time there. Just some of the sessions. They have an Aspiring Treasures workshop, like a whole program, Treasure B. And it's up in the ESC, up in the Northeast Ohio. There's no clear pathway to become a school treasurer, so they are kind of growing their own and having treasurers mentor young people who are interested in that. Our own Gary Baker was on the panel. He did very good talking about issues in the state. We have new leadership. Our next president-elect of OSBA is Lee Schreiner from Southwestern. He is an educator, and we look forward to his work. But we also had our own Columbus City School staff, Samantha Smith and Michelle Lewis, and Dr. Drew Milligan present at the conference. And so we did have leadership and representation, so we're glad about that. The National School Board President-elect is Charlie Wilson from Worthington City School District. So we will have the state and the national leadership right here in Ohio, and that's huge. That's huge for the work that we do on behalf of the district and on behalf of the country. But both of them next year will be right here in Ohio. And that's Ann Branham, who's the current NSBA president. Cool stuff. That mobile video lab is from North Canton Schools, and that's their media department. And they were interviewing and creating videos from the conference. And they have a very cool lab, as well as that stuff from Excelis. So really cool people exhibit. One of the most provocative stories of the entire conference was Maurice Claret. And you've heard his story, but you haven't heard it in person. And the one thing I walked away with Maurice Claret saying was, does your child's school schedule look like mine? And just how student athletes are sometimes given less rigor, and just so they can play ball, just so they can get that accolade or that championship. And he talks very transparently about his journey and how he overcame that through some very tough lessons. It was a very good speech. He was very, very transparent. But we may encounter many defeats, but we must not be defeated. And I thought that spoke very well to him and his message and his story. And finally, Educators Got Talent yesterday at Phi Delta Kappa. I thought you was putting your picture up, so I didn't use the group picture because I thought you was going to use it. A group of educators, most importantly, the two students on the left, both perform, and the one in the white is Milani Abakate from Linda McKinley. She is amazing. She has a beautiful voice, and she is just incredible. We are very excited about that. And finally, my announcement is that Columbus Afrocentric will be hosting the HBCU Homecoming on Saturday, December 28th. It's from 2 to 6 p.m. and it's a HBCU college fair. So bring out your middle and high school students, elementary if you want to get them inspired. And we're looking for more information about that. And that's all I have. Thank you, President Baker.
Thank you, Board Member Gibbs. And any other announcements or points of pride? Board Member Adair.
I have one point of pride. I want to say thank you to Board Member Gibbs for all your service and for constantly being out in the community, being the face of the board, connecting with people in a real way. And we have some big shoes to fill. I never remember to bring photos. Never. But it shows just how much you're out and about and really connecting with people. So I want to recognize you and say thank you for that. I did have the opportunity to hang out with Dr. Dixon one evening last week, and we attended 2 events. By happy accident, we didn't even coordinate that very well, but we were together. And the first was we were celebrating the launch of the Read Aloud, a series that are, Siri thinks I'm talking to her. Sorry.
Read it out.
Our food service production staff worked really hard. Chris Weatherholt from the Nutrition Education Farm to School, she's the Farm to School coordinator, K through 12. And so we read books and they were filmed, and our teachers can now use them within lessons, and it goes along with our curriculum. I don't know if you guys know, but a lot of our schools are doing community gardens, and then they're eating the food and learning about it. And so it was an amazing opportunity. So thank you to our team and to Franklin Park Conservatory and to all the readers. We had readers from the staff. We had Councilmember Brown. We had some really great, Dr. Dixon read. We had a lot of really great readers. That was a really, really fun event. And then we happened to across the street over at East High School where the all-city chorale competition really was. Happened, and that was really, really fun. And we have some amazing, talented singers in our district. So I encourage everyone to get out and support the arts. I know we had a lot of athletic stuff and exciting athletic stuff going on. We also have a lot of fun and exciting artists out there too.
Thank you, Board Member Adair. I have a few things. More photos from the Ohio School Board Association Capitol Conference. I know most of you had the opportunity to attend. That is a great opportunity to meet board members from all across the state and get to know them. Yes, let's see. I did present at on one of the panels talking about current issues. And we also participated in the Black Caucus events. And second, both the ladies on the right are state school board members. Now, Ms. Gibbs is being, as she always is, less than truthful about the Educators Got Talent event. She received the Community Service Award from PDK for 2019, and here she is accepting her award. So, congratulations. You omitted. That's a lie of omission, my mother used to say. So, congratulations, Ms. Gibbs. It was a great event. Highlighting our employees and our students performing in that event, and that's always a great event every year. This is our partner convocation. So we had this at 3700 South High Street, and that was the boring part. A lot of us attended that event. Superintendent Dixon and Ms. Gillison laid out for our partners, hundreds of whom assembled there, our expectations for ongoing and continued and improved partnership. whereas we're reaching 10 or so thousand of our students now through those partnerships, we need to touch all of our kids with our partners. And we need to have the positive impacts that we know we need and that they have promised us. Any other announcements, points of pride? All right, Vice President Cole, I'll ask you to offer a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Board of Education recess into executive session per section 121.22G1 of the Ohio Revised Code to consider the appointment, employment, or compensation of public employees.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded. Mr. Treasurer?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Colleagues, we will now recess into executive session.